So, how do we make sense of the world? I mean, really. When you look at how countries deal with each other, are you seeing an endless, inevitable clash for power? Or is there a way to build lasting peace through cooperation and rules? We're going to break down the major playbooks that nations use to navigate this crazy world and what they mean for all of us. You know, this isn't some new debate. For literally centuries, we've been pulled between two giant competing ideas. On one hand, you've got the philosopher Immanuel Kant and his dream of perpetual peace, the idea that we can actually build a stable world order using laws and shared institutions. But on the other hand, you've got Hegel with a much grimmer take that since every country has its own unique agenda, war is, at the end of the day, the only real way to settle big arguments. One path sees a future built on rules, the other sees a future settled by force. So why are we still talking about this? Why hasn't this debate been settled after 200 years? Well, it's because both sides are trying to solve the exact same fundamental problem with how our world is set up.
And that problem is summed up in one word: anarchy. Now, when you hear that word, you probably think of chaos and riots in the streets. But in international relations, it means something very specific. It just means there's no world government. There's no global police force you can call, no Supreme Court for nations. Every country is its own boss. So the big question is, in a world with no one in charge, how do you keep things from just becoming a free-for-all?
But what if this problem isn't as solid as it seems? The political scientist Alexander Wendt dropped this bombshell of an idea. Anarchy is what states make of it. What he's saying is that the nature of this leaderless world isn't set in stone. It all depends on how we, as nations, decide to think about it and act within it. Tuck that idea away, because it's going to be really important.
Okay, so let's get into the first playbook, and honestly, it's probably the most intuitive one. It's called realism. And for realists, the answer to the anarchy problem is pretty straightforward.
Realists look at this anarchic world and draw a very stark conclusion. For them, the number one goal of any country is just survival. And when there's no global 911 to call for help, survival is guaranteed by one thing and one thing only: power. We're talking military might, economic strength. It all becomes part of this constant grinding competition for security.
And from this point of view, a country's behavior is a direct result of how strong it is. So as a nation like China builds its economy and modernizes its military, a realist would say it's not a question of if it's going to get more aggressive on the world stage, but when and how. Its ambitions are inevitably going to grow along with its power. This whole dynamic leads to a classic realist nightmare called the Thucydides trap. It's named after the ancient Greek historian who wrote about the war between Athens and Sparta. And the idea is simple. When a rising power starts to make an established power nervous, that fear and insecurity makes war incredibly likely. Think Athens and Sparta back then, or as you hear all the time today, China and the United States. And this is where the strategy gets, well, pretty cold-blooded. The offensive realist John Mearsheimer laid out some chillingly practical options for a big power. You can try buck passing, basically getting another country to do the hard work of containing your rival for you. Or you could try to bait and bleed them, tricking your opponent into a long, draining war that saps their strength. Or even bloodletting, where you just sit back and make sure two of your rivals stay locked in a conflict that weakens them both. It is a stark, purely power-focused way of seeing the world. But what if there's another way? That question brings us to the main alternative to realism, the liberal project. And its goal isn't just to manage this game of power politics, but to actually rise above it. See, liberals look at that same anarchic world and say, you know what, we can build a better system. And as you can see here, that's exactly what people have tried to do for the last century. After the disaster of World War I, we got the League of Nations. After World War II, we got the United Nations. Then in 1998, the International Criminal Court was created to hold people accountable for war crimes. And this project is still alive. For example, Ukraine is on track to become the ICC's 125th member. So how is this all supposed to work? Well, liberals have a whole toolkit they believe can build a more peaceful world. They put their faith in international law, like the rules upheld by the ICC, to stop aggression. They argue that when our economies are all tied together, war just becomes too expensive to even consider. And they believe that diplomacy, global institutions like the UN, and the spread of democracy can create a world where working together is just normal. And a really key part of that liberal vision is the idea that democracies are more peaceful, especially with each other. And this isn't just some vague hope. It's a huge area of research. You've organizations like the VDEM Institute that are literally dedicated to measuring the health of democracies all over the globe, trying to turn this ideal of a peaceful, democratic world into something you can actually track and support. Okay, so we have the realist world of power politics, and the liberal world of rules and cooperation. But our third perspective, constructivism, comes along and asks a really radical question. What if both of those worlds are just built on a foundation of sand? And this takes us right back to that powerful quote, "Anarchy is what states make of it." Constructivists argue that the whole international system isn't driven by hard realities like the number of tanks you have or how much money is in your treasury. No, they say it's driven by the shared ideas, beliefs, and identities we all have. Is another country a threat? A rival? A friend? The answer isn't some objective fact. It's a reality that we all build together. This table really breaks it down perfectly. Wendt laid out 3 possible cultures of anarchy. In a Hobbesian world, everyone sees everyone else as an enemy. The logic is pure competition, a war of all against all. That's pure realism. In a Lockean world, states are just rivals. They compete, sure, but they also respect each other's right to exist. It's more of a live and let live system. But in a Kantian world, states see each other as friends. The logic becomes cooperative, and you settle problems peacefully. It's the same anarchy in all 3, but totally different shared ideas create totally different worlds. So, we have 3 very different playbooks for how the world works. But this isn't just an abstract academic debate, right? These ideas have massive consequences, especially when the global order feels like it's starting to crack. You can actually draw a pretty chilling parallel to another time. Back in the 1930s, the world went through a crisis of what you might call the Enlightenment project, this core belief in reason, science, and progress. The rise of fascism and the total collapse of the old international order just shattered that faith. And today, you hear echoes of that crisis, a new rise in authoritarianism, democracies weakening from within, and this breakdown of a shared understanding of basic facts. And that brings us to the most important question of all. As we try to find our way through our own turbulent times, which of these frameworks is going to guide us? Are we going to fall back on the realist playbook and see the world as just an endless struggle for power? Are we going to double down on the liberal project of building a world based on rules? Or could we find a constructivist path that actually changed the world by changing the ideas we share about it? And that leads to one final, huge question that sits underneath all of this. At its heart, the dream of a peaceful, cooperative world is a bet. It's a bet on the power of reason to win out over our worst impulses. But in times of crisis, when everything feels like it's shaking, just how resilient is that reason? That's something to think about.